Story 1. From ages 3 to 7, I would sometimes get up at night and go to the top of the stairs. Fully awake, I would see a faceless man at the bottom. After a second, he would run up the stairs toward me very quickly. I would run away and scream until my mother came and comforted me. When I was 7, I decided to fight it. The next time I saw it, I stood my ground and screamed as it ran closer. It reached an arm out to grab me as it neared the top of the stairs. I cocked my fist to punch it, but it disappeared. It appeared at the bottom again, ran up, reached for me, and disappeared before it could reach me. It repeated this several times before I realized it was on a loop and could not actually get to me. It might not have been a real entity, but an imprinted memory. After that night, I never saw it again. Story 2. I walked into a room and, for a single moment, I saw with absolute clarity myself from the front walking into the room, as if I had already arrived, and turned to watch myself walk in behind me. I remember being extremely spooked for a moment. The feeling quickly gave way to the thought, is that really what people see when I enter a room? Is that how I look? Story 3. When I was 5, we moved into an old farmhouse. My room was the biggest and the only one with a closet. It was a walk-in closet with a tiny window near the ceiling, not big enough for anyone to fit through. It also had no door, just an open doorway that faced my bed. I can only assume my mom had never seen a horror movie. I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and I was one of those kids who never slept. I was quietly playing with toys on the bed when I got the distinct feeling I was being watched. I looked up and saw what I can only describe as a shadow person, a darker shade of black than the dark closet behind it. Its eyes were red. I froze in place until it put a hand on the outside of the closet as if feeling for the light switch. Then I bolted and ran to my parents. My stepfather searched the whole house thinking there was an intruder, but there was not. I still remember it so vividly, and I'm now 38. Story 4. I shared this story on Reddit before and have been thinking about it a lot. It is not exactly a scary thing I saw, but I still wonder about it, so I will paste it here. My best friend and I always talked about crazy dreams. I never thought much of it until he told me about one where he was hit by a car and died. We were about 15 or 16 when he told me. We were into conspiracies, aliens, the paranormal, and lucid dreaming, so we talked about those things a lot. He died just before he would have turned 20. He said he was riding a skateboard, wearing all black, when a car hit him. He said he could see everyone at his funeral. He even said his crush was at the funeral and laughed about it. He kept going on about how real it felt. It really shook me up for a while, and then eventually I forgot about it. A few years later, after I had long forgotten the dream, it happened for real. His crush was at his funeral. He had been hit by a car and died. He was wearing all black, which were his work clothes, and he was riding my skateboard. Every detail I remembered from his dream came true. There are parts he told me that I do not remember. I felt crazy and did not tell anyone. I do not know why or how he saw it in his dream. I have wondered if he would have told anyone else. It left me with so many questions, but I guess now I have at least some proof to myself that our souls go on after we die. I wish I knew why he experienced that dream and told me about it. There had to be some reason. I would not have believed this if I had not experienced it myself. Has anyone ever experienced anything similar? Story 5. This might sound odd, but an old abandoned truck lay at the bottom of a ravine on a road I had to drive backward on, with drop-offs on both sides. I stared at that broken truck, thinking if your car went down that hill it would never come back up. No tow truck could make it up that road. I wondered ominously what happened to the person who fell. My intuition rightly told me to leave. Story 6. I used to work in a primate sanctuary in South Africa with many volunteers from around the world. One man from the United Kingdom showed up and we knew right away that something was off with him. He lied constantly about wild things, stole from us, we caught him in the act, and once injured himself so we would take him to the hospital and make a fuss over him. He also told me he had been in trouble back home for setting his parents' house on fire. We thought it was another of his outrageous lies, so we ignored him. There was a strange incident with a bushfire as well. We had extinguished the fire and it mysteriously started up again in another area just after we returned to bed. Then the monkeys started dying and we became suspicious, so we called his parents. We asked them to encourage him to move on and do something else with his time in South Africa. His parents did not use the tact we had asked for and told their son straight out that we did not want him at the sanctuary. That night I was woken by him. I could not see a thing. It was pitch black and my room was filled with smoke. I remember screaming at him, "What have you done?" And he just walked away with a terrifying smile on his face. I had baby monkeys and other orphaned wildlife in my room, which I quickly got out. As I ran past the garage, our monkey kitchen, there was an explosion and a huge fireball. We managed to get the animals from the house into the car and moved it away from the property. Neighbors helped with fire extinguishers and hoses, and the fire brigade was on the way. I was in a total state of shock. The volunteer calmly walked over to me and asked for a light for his cigarette. The look in his eyes scared me more than anything I had ever seen before, and he had a huge shit-eating grin on his face. Once the fire was out, he went back into the house and went to sleep while the sanctuary owner and I tried to figure out how to feed all the animals, since the kitchen and the fridges had been destroyed. We were also too scared to sleep with him in the house. The next morning we told him the sanctuary was closing and we all had to leave. We bundled him into a neighbor's car and left him at a bus stop in town. The police confirmed the fire had been arson and had been started with an oil lamp and a blowtorch. I still have nightmares and PTSD from the incident. He is just living his life somewhere in England. Story 7. I used to work at a diner. One night it was just me and one front of house staff member closing. We were the only people in the restaurant. I finished first and helped her with the remaining closing tasks. While rolling silverware together, a plate crashed to the floor. All the plates had been at least a foot from the edge of the counter, so I have no idea how it could have fallen. After that, I cleaned the bathrooms. She swept and I mopped, and then we were done. Before we left, I needed to use the restroom and found the sink running, though I had not turned it on. She had been within sight the entire time, so it could not have been her. This was a couple of years before the owner installed cameras, so we never figured out what happened that night. Story 8. I have two experiences that sound mundane but really shook me up. Years ago, probably in the early 2000s, I was camping in the Adirondacks with a few friends and my parents. I was a teenager at the time. No drugs or alcohol were involved. It gets dark there for great stargazing, and a meteor shower was supposed to peak over the next couple of nights. My friends and I quietly watched the sky. I watched shooting stars and satellites. Satellites look like slow-moving stars, faint dots inching across the sky. Sometimes they fade or grow brighter depending on their trajectory, but they are easy to recognize. Suddenly we noticed a brighter dot moving left to right, low across the sky just above the treeline. It was larger and lower than a satellite and moved faster relative to us. I thought it was a plane, but we did not see blinking navigation lights, so it seemed odd. The light was more orange than the white I would expect from a normal plane, and we tried to figure out what we were seeing. Then it shot straight up, accelerating to incredible speed almost instantly. It flew straight up at first, then arced away until it disappeared into the distance, almost above us. We all saw it change course and blast off like a rocket. To this day, we have no explanation. I have never seen anything like it before or since. The night before my birthday a few years ago, I was getting ready for bed when I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach, like something was wrong. I tried to brush it off, but I was on high alert when I climbed into bed. I was restless and could not fall asleep. I thought I was just excited about the next day. I tossed and turned most of the night and had very strange dreams in which my grandfather tried to talk to me, but I could not understand him. I remember bits and pieces. In one dream, my mother was very upset, sobbing, and I saw my grandmother even though she had passed away a few years earlier. The next morning, I woke up and ran into my mother in the hallway. I expected her to greet me excitedly because she always made a big deal about birthdays, but her eyes were puffy and red. She hugged me and said she was sorry to do it on my birthday, that they had received a phone call early that morning, and that my grandfather had died during the night. He had passed in his sleep. Story 9. I am generally an anxious person, so I tend not to trust my gut as much as I should. However, that can be a good thing because a very strong feeling is rare and I do trust it. The scary part. I was on the bus, as usual, looking around mindlessly. Then I made eye contact with the man sitting across from me. I had never seen him before, but my blood went ice cold and I can only describe his eyes as like Richard Ramirez's. It gives me chills to this day to think about them. I made sure the bus was gone before I went to my car so he could not see where I went. I was that freaked out. It felt like a lightning bolt through my stomach when we made eye contact. It has not happened to me before or since. His eyes were just black, and I was terrified. I knew I was supposed to be with my now husband, and I knew I never wanted to see that man again. When my gut is overwhelming, I trust it. It was the strongest sensation that something was very wrong. I was just sitting on the bus, but everything was screaming at me to get off. It was not the same anxiety you get on a plane. It was the fear that this person was dangerous. Story 10. Not seen but felt. The night my dad died, I woke in the middle of the night with a strong thought that he had passed, and it turned out to be true. He had coronavirus disease 2019. He seemed to have largely recovered. I had talked to him earlier that day and he said he was fine, just tired and not feeling 100%, but he had just been to the doctor and had no concerns. My parents were long divorced and he lived alone about 50 miles from where I live. Around 2 or 3 in the morning I woke from a deep sleep with an overwhelming feeling that my dad had passed. I shook it off and told myself I was being silly and irrational. I did not call him at that moment because I knew he was still recovering and I did not want to disturb him in the middle of the night. The next morning my sister called and said she had been calling my dad and he was not answering. I knew then that my feeling was, unfortunately, correct. My sister lives locally and went to his place and found him deceased. He had a heart attack, and the estimated time of death was essentially the same time I had my sense in the middle of the night. Somehow I believe I knew and was alerted the moment my dad passed. Story 11. I once saw a very old white-haired beagle swallow a dead bird whole in one gulp. Story 12. One night at work was creepy. It was shortly after we had lost many patients to coronavirus disease 2019. One unit had been completely emptied. A call light went off in the empty room where those patients had been. Because my workplace had not hired a security guard or installed security cameras, a nurse asked me, "Are you brave?" I was passing out ice water and mumbled, "Yes, what's wrong?" She said, "Please check that call. Like, a ghost is setting it off." I asked, "What if it is not a ghost?" She said, "We are right behind you." I opened the door. There was no one. I checked under the 2 hospital beds, in the patient's bathroom, and in the closet. I turned off the call light and told the nurse there was no one there. She insisted it was a ghost. As I left the unit, the call light went back on. I went back and shut it off and it came back on 5 times. Story 13. People will probably just brush this off, but I've had several unexplainable events that I once considered paranormal. Over time it sounds crazy even to me, but other people were with me for some of them. Growing up, we always had what we assumed was a ghost follow us from place to place as we moved a lot when I was a child. It never seemed malicious, but it did seem territorial and didn't like being called fake. Most activity happened when a guest was over. Once, when my cousin was watching me while my parents were gone, I was telling her past stories and she brushed them off, saying ghosts aren't real. In the middle of broad daylight, while sitting in our living room, a friend knocked on the storm door asking if I could come play. As my cousin got up to answer, the main wooden door slammed in her face right before she reached it, and the deadbolt engaged and the door locked. She was so terrified she called my parents crying and begged them to come back. Another incident was at a different house, again when someone new was around. My girlfriend and I were lying on my bed with my 2 brothers while they played with my iPod, and she and I talked. It was her first time at the house, and I had told her about past experiences, which she thought was silly. Nothing had happened that was weird, so I asked if she thought I was lying, and she replied yes, jokingly. Less than 5 seconds later, my bedroom door slammed shut. The ceiling fan started turning on and off. Several things I had on my nightstand flew across the room and hit the door that had slammed, and the doors to my dresser started slamming shut over and over. This was by far the most aggressive thing it ever did, and all three of them screamed and cried. I'm sure no one will believe this, but I have no reason to lie. Even now it's hard for me to believe it happened when I look back. Story 14. I had a nightmare that turned into sleep paralysis. I was being chased by aliens that could turn invisible in my dream. My brain likened it to the movie Dark Skies. It was terrifying. I woke up. My room was lit by a low red light. They were standing over my bed. I was freaking out. When I was finally able to move, I was overwhelmed because my logical brain knew it was not real, but my body screamed that it was. I moved my arms and covered my face, telling my partner to turn on her flashlight. She did, but there was nothing. My brain insisted they could turn invisible. I spent 30 minutes terrified. Eventually, I went to the bathroom because I had to pee badly. When I stepped back out, there was one standing at the bottom of the stairs. I wish I were making this up. I ran back to my room and was terrified for an hour before I fell asleep. Story 15. I was at a mall with my small children years ago. I sat on a bench about 10 feet from the doors of the two small game stores my son wanted to enter and watched him. He was about 7. Then I noticed a man watching him and following him slowly as he moved from one store to the other. An overwhelming alarm went off in my head. I knew the man was a predator. I took my other 2 children, grabbed my son, and we left the mall. The scariest part, which I will never forget, was the absolute cold urge to kill him if necessary. I felt I would have had the ability to do it. I have never experienced anything like that before or since. I was a young mother. Story 16. I work in a historic building constructed on an even older settlement. On 2 separate occasions, I am fairly certain I saw a ghost. The first time, I saw a young man in uniform reflected in a window that is very far up and could not possibly have been an actual person inside or outside the building. About a year later, a colleague told me that a few people over the years have spotted a young man in a uniform on that side of the building. I had never told them what I had seen. The second time, I bent down as my colleague walked back into the room. When I looked up, there was nobody there, but someone had definitely walked into the room. Story 17. I am late to the party, so this probably will not be seen. Back in the early 2010s, my father, brother, and I decided to try a hunting ground closer to home, so we hired a local guide to show us around a forested region. I remember that it was November because it was white-tailed deer rut season and the forest had a beautiful, fresh powder of snow. We traveled back trails and staked out openings with tall sedges but never came across a deer worth taking. The sun was low, so we decided to head back. By the time we made it to the paved highway, it was dark. The sky was clear, the stars were out, but there was barely any moonlight. If anyone has been to a very dark place on Earth, the sky is incredibly clear, and with no wind it was pristine. As we were driving down the highway, we saw lights in the distance. I assumed there had been a car accident and that emergency vehicles were present, as that is not uncommon in winter, especially at night. But these lights were extremely bright, so much that your eyes adjusted and the dark surroundings became less visible. I thought there must be a hill or bend in the road that was preventing me from seeing the emergency vehicles. Everyone in the truck tried to guess what was going on because the area between where the headlights reached and where the bright flashing lights were was indistinct. Turned out there was no hill or bend. The road was straight, and when we reached the point where we had expected the lights to be, they were no longer there. Instead, they were 200 to 300 yards off the road over the forest. I could only determine that because they were illuminating the trees. We stopped and stared. The lights were vibrant, as if the contrast in your eyes had been turned up. I mentally made out red and white flashing, which is why I thought it was an ambulance. My brother insisted it was red and blue. My father saw orange instead of red. The guide was not thinking about colors at all. The guide aimed his gun at the lights and said, "Should I shoot it?" My family and I said, "No way, not a chance." We were there for maybe 5 minutes alone on the highway with the lights before other vehicles started arriving and stopping. Soon there were 6 or 7 vehicles, with people climbing out in winter clothes to get a better look at what was making the flashing lights. But by the time they had settled, the lights had grown smaller and smaller until they vanished. We used to camp in the nearby park area, and this was our first time hunting in the region. Since the event, none of us have gone back, and we have not seen or heard from the guide since. It may not sound frightening, but it rattled us. It was the stillness of the night, where even the sound of your breath could feel like it might set something off. The huge, vibrant lights against the black sky and the nervousness that comes with feeling out of control stayed with us. Story 18. At a friend's grandfather's funeral, I witnessed an invisible force push two brass candelabra caps off a shelf at different velocities and angles within 5 minutes of each other. Story 19. Honestly, the scariest thing I've ever seen was late at night when I thought I saw someone standing in my backyard. I went outside and there was nothing there. I still have no idea what it was. Story 20. I had two precognitions of doom that came true. The first was more than a decade before the second. At a friend's house for a party, I looked at her dog and its face became like a skull. I had been drinking, but not very drunk. It was a clear, unmistakable skull. I did not say anything to anyone. Less than an hour later, the dog was dead. It had escaped through a door in a fence that someone had left open and was struck and killed by a car. Story 21. I know the title says that you can't explain and my story has an explanation at the end, but I am no expert and I do not know if it is what happened. I am from Europe and went on a road trip in Nevada 2 years ago. It was a nice experience, but one thing left me terrified for about 2 days. Of course, we visited Rachel and went to the Little Ale Inn, with plans to see the black mailbox later. The man at the bar said the mailbox was boring and told us to go directly to Area 51. He said you can take pictures, even if signs say no pictures, just never cross the line. We were skeptical at first, but he showed us pictures of himself and his dog at Area 51. He gave us directions. It was a long ride, about 45 minutes, on an unpaved road. We saw antelope-like animals. They only looked that way. I looked them up later and they were a different species, and joked, now we are completely wrong and in Africa. But we eventually reached Area 51, took some pictures and left. When we reached the extraterrestrial highway again at about 4 p.m., we thought it would take about an hour to the next main highway toward Las Vegas. 10 minutes into the drive, however, the clocks showed 5:10 p.m. My friend, who is no nonsense, said, "We just lost an hour." I was very confused and assumed we had simply remembered the time wrong, but he is reliable and would not make that mistake. We compared all our devices, our iPhones, Android phones, and the car's navigation system, and all of them were an hour ahead. I usually talk a lot, but for the next 50 minutes of the drive, I did not say a word. We had lost an hour at Area 51. It freaked me out. When we reached the regular highway, we regained the lost hour. It was a relief, but I still wondered what had happened. My friend was fine and stopped thinking about it, but I could not sleep and messaged friends back home asking if they had any explanation. About 2 days later, I learned that cell reception is so poor out there that phones can connect to an emergency service in a different time zone. That fits because on the extraterrestrial highway we had no reception at all, and it returned roughly when the hour reappeared. I am not completely sure why every device connected to the same tower, but that explanation seems plausible. Story 22. Not scary, but unnerving in a weird way. I heard an old wives' tale that a double yolk in an egg meant pregnancy. I did not believe it. One day when my girlfriend was over, and we were trying to get pregnant, 6 of the dozen eggs had double yolks. I could not believe it. A week later, it was confirmed she was 3 weeks pregnant. Story 23. We lived in a big ranch house in Central Florida on about 4 acres of swampy farmland. I was very stressed and not sleeping. One night, I was startled awake. I was lying on my left side, opened my eyes, and saw a black silhouette standing less than a foot from my face next to my bed. It was the size and shape of a little girl, about 5 or 6 years old. I gasped, and the silhouette seemed to startle as well. It slipped under my bed like a sheet of paper. I spent a minute paralyzed with fear, asking myself, did I just see that? Another incident happened at the same house. My son was 24 at the time. He got up in the middle of the night for water and did not bother to turn on any lights. He came down the hall, turned the corner into the kitchen, and an adult-sized silhouette was standing in front of the refrigerator. He said it seemed to be reaching out to him. It scared him so badly he dropped his cup, ran back to his room, and locked the door. I had a stillborn daughter years before, so for a while I thought maybe what I saw was her, which made me very sad. Later, I found out the property was very close to one of the earliest European settlements in Central Florida. The settlers had been fighting with some of the indigenous Seminole people. Two of a settler's children, a boy and a girl, were reportedly killed and buried in unmarked graves in that area. That gave me the willies. There seemed to be a lot of bad energy there. We were happy to move. Story 24. This is not as crazy as many others mentioned, but I will share mine, laughing out loud. When I was a teenager, I lived in Gulfport, Florida. There was a large park near the water. My friend and I used to ride our bikes everywhere, and one night we sat on a swing bench overlooking the ocean. It was about 2 to 3 in the morning. We talked for about half an hour when suddenly a giant fireball materialized out of thin air right above us. We both jumped back and asked if the other had seen it. We experienced the same thing. The heat, the sound, everything. It appeared and then fizzled out, as if the air had caught on fire in front of us. Frightened me greatly. Story 25. I was at the Missouri State Penitentiary on a tour and took a picture through a window into the gas chamber, a dark room. In the photo, you could see my reflection and everything behind me. When I got home and looked through my pictures, I saw that the photo was a live photo, which means if I press and hold it, it moves like a short video. I pressed. And when the live photo stopped, there was a man's face directly behind me, looking angry. I would have never seen it if the photo had not been a live photo. The last person who had that photo was my aunt, and she deleted it because she did not want any negative spirits coming through. So the picture is gone forever. It was still pretty scary and impressive. Story 26. In 2002, my band was crammed into a van traveling south between Indianapolis and Lafayette, Indiana. It was raining hard and it was summertime around 2 in the morning. There was nothing except corn and soybean fields on either side of us. On the east side of Interstate 65, about half a mile off the highway, 5 bright beams of light, like from a search helicopter, illuminated parts of the field at the same time. The lights slowly scanned for 10 to 15 seconds, then went out simultaneously. The 5 beams came from different areas of the sky above the field. We slowed down to get a better look and rolled down the windows to listen for helicopters. I couldn't imagine helicopters flying in that weather, and we didn't hear anything but the rain. It was the only explanation that made sense. It was frightening in the moment, and it took us a few minutes to conclude it probably wasn't aliens from another dimension. Still, it scared us so much that we decided to get a hotel instead of driving the rest of the way back to Indianapolis. Story 27. When I was 8 or 10, I dug a hole on my family's ranch and found a lot of long, light-colored hair. Frightened me. Story 28. Driving home late one night, I saw what looked like a person standing at the side of the road. No face, no movement, just standing. When my headlights hit them, they vanished. There was no jump or step. They were simply gone. I stopped the car, looked around, and there was nobody, not even footprints. Story 29. As others have said, I have also experienced 2 precognitive events. One was a recurring dream. The day after the dream, I learned that someone close to me had died. I cannot explain it, and I was terrified of that dream. Story 30. Quite a few. 2 notable experiences. The first I have mentioned before. I am pretty sure it was sleep paralysis. I was young and woke up to a naked woman standing at my door, glaring at me. She had long hair and was missing her lower jaw. Blood ran down her front, and she wore a strange bone necklace. I could not scream or move, and she approached with her eyes locked on mine, full of malice. I passed out with her eyes inches from my face. I can remember the feeble gasps I made in fear. The strange thing is this happened about 30 years ago, but I recently recalled the shocking image. I am now married, and I realized that the woman I saw is the spitting image of my wife, although my wife of course has a lower jaw. The second event was 10 years ago. I was taking the bus home from work. The The route passes a large hospital and the hospital stop is long, with many people getting on and off. I had not taken this route for a while, and while waiting I looked up toward the hospital roof. There were helicopters and it is a tall building, so I was bored. Then I saw a figure on one of the rooftops, which was strange. She was rake-thin, scarecrow-like, with long black hair flowing in the wind, looking down at the bus and at me. I turned away, feeling uneasy, and returned to my phone. I suddenly felt a prickly sensation and glanced out the window at the people boarding and alighting. The skinny scarecrow woman was right at the window, her black hair and stare fixed on me. It was the same one I had seen on the roof a short while before. Story 31. A few months ago, I had the most terrifying experience of my life. I am an anxious person. Sometimes I hear whispers or see things in the corners of my eyes, though not often enough to take seriously. This was on a whole other level. One night, I woke up thirsty and wanted to drink. I moved a little in bed and then froze. A clear wave of pure terror rushed through me and my whole body screamed not to move. It felt like a person standing at the foot of my bed, leaning over with its face above mine, staring. My eyes were closed and I was too terrified to open them, but it felt so close I could faintly feel its breath. I lay there for what felt like an eternity. Eventually the feeling passed and I stayed still for another 10 minutes before I felt safe enough to move. A few weeks later it happened again, this time in the corner of my room. It was not as close, but I felt the same presence. I pretended to sleep, hoping it would leave, and I think it did. You might think sleep paralysis. I thought so too for a while, but the second time I was awake reading on my phone. I genuinely do not know what it was. It remains the most terrifying thing I have experienced. Story 32. I was living with my mother and sister during my high school years. It was a decent apartment on the 3rd floor. I did not actually see anything. I only heard voices. During that time, I often heard my name called when no one was around. It was strange that this only happened in one room, my bedroom. I remember one incident clearly. It was during summer break. I slept late and around 10 or 11 in the morning I was woken by my mother calling my name while standing next to me. At least I thought she did. When I woke up I realized I was alone. Not only in my room but in the entire apartment. I slept with the door locked because of paranoia. I remember a second time when I was listening to music and heard someone call my name clearly near the half-open window. We were on the 3rd floor. I am not sure whether that was something paranormal or whether I was hallucinating. I was in a deep depression during high school, so it might have been related to that. I have not experienced this since I moved from that place. Story 33. I heard my name whispered at 3 in the morning in an empty house. Instant insomnia. Story 34. Went on a chill camping trip with 2 of my buddies. We went to his grandmother's place and camped in tents. We found an abandoned farm nearby with a huge building where they kept animals and spent a week getting high in it. We did not throw anything or destroy anything. We just went in, sat on the concrete, got high, and laughed. After a week, we were talking about paranormal stuff, sitting in the same spot we normally did, which had a huge, roughly 4-meter-tall wooden wall beside it. My friend, who used to draw pentagrams, keep candles in his room, and attempt to summon demons, started talking about weird things happening, like his television randomly turning on and his drawers being open when he woke up. The huge wooden door behind us made a weird noise, so we all jumped away because we were in a paranoid mood after listening to him. The door fell to the floor just behind him when we jumped away. A second later, he might have been hit. Creeped me out. Ironically, after a solid year of smoking with this same guy almost every night, I told him I felt like we were going to wreck our futures if we kept it up and that I was stopping. He did not want to stop, so we stopped hanging out. 6 years later, I heard he was using cocaine and was basically a skeleton. 7 years later, he was in jail for reasons we never found out, and he legally changed his name to Lucifer Morningstar. That is, the devil, and was involved in a Satan-worshipping cult in our city. It blows my mind how people can spiral like that. Story 35. Not really seen, outside a couple nightmares, but mainly felt. I stayed at a distant relative's house for a couple of weekends as a kid and experienced the first and only paranormal feeling I've ever had. It was a ranch property in the Pacific Northwest, and we were staying in the attic with very creepy, narrow vaulted ceilings. I felt something sinister in the air the entire time, like I was being aggressively stalked and toyed with. They had horses and an old barn. In that barn, and scattered around it, was the gnarliest rat infestation I've ever seen. So many dead rats, many mutilated by the stressed horses. It was disturbing when we walked through it as kids, almost in pure darkness. At night in the attic, I swear I could hear angry, harsh whispers but couldn't tell where they came from. When I eventually fell asleep, I had the most vivid and disturbing nightmare I've ever had. I was at a daycare, 7 or 8 years old, waiting to be picked up by my parent. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but then a chilling sensation swept over me. I heard my mother's heels and the jingle of her key ring, but when I looked up, it was this immensely tall, creepily slender, bony woman in a black gown with no head. The creepiest part wasn't just the lack of a head. It was how much of the neck she still had, and how it wasn't a clean cut but jagged, like it had been bitten off. Her neck and collar were very defined and bony, and she had very long, slender fingers with absurdly long nails. She approached the daycare gate like a parent waiting for their child and just stood there facing me. I refused to leave. Eventually, she pushed through the gate and began pursuing me through the daycare, terrifying me until I finally woke up. I don't know what caused that or why I felt that sinister vibe. I've never had any dream or feeling like it since. It still creeps me out thinking about it. Luckily these days, the only dreams I remember take place in Gotham and aren't that intense. Story 36. From about age 5 to about 12 or 13, I had the same nightmare repeatedly, sometimes several nights a week. In the dream, I was running for my life with certain family members. No matter how fast we ran, they disappeared one by one. I never saw them die, but somehow I knew they were gone. They were always the same people and in the same order. I would wake up terrified, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was not real. Then one day the nightmares stopped. I did not think much of it at the time, but here is the part that still chills me. I am 30 now, and over the past 10 years those same family members have died, each one in the exact same order as in my nightmare. I still cannot explain it to this day. Story 37. 1. I experienced sleep paralysis for the first time. I woke up in my room with a huge sense of dread. I was about 17. I remember screaming for my dad in the other room, but I could not make a sound. I tried to scream as hard as I could, but nothing came out. Shadows grew longer and I felt like I was about to be attacked, but nothing was in sight. Then I woke up for real, terrified. 2. I was at a local Halloween event next to a forest said to be haunted because of a Native American massacre that occurred on that land. My friends and I left the event to look at the marker. It was dark and we walked about 200 yards away from everyone to see a gravestone. We saw the marker, a small plaque briefly describing the tragic events. On the way back, a friend who had been walking behind us started screaming and ran. Ahead, as I looked back, I saw a shadow-like blob scurry from behind one tree to another. It was about the size of a dog but looked like someone in a cloak, crouched down and somehow moving forward that way. I cannot explain it well, but we ran back to the event. Afterward, one friend found the outline of a face in a photo he had taken of the marker. It was one of the more paranormal experiences I have had, and I have not had many. Story 38. A whole day disappears when I spend time on Reddit. 1 minute it is 8 a.m., the next it is 8 p.m. Story 39. When I was 3 or 4 years old, I was kicking a ball in front of my house. The house to the left was vacant and the door was open. I kicked the ball inside on purpose, just kid things, and went to retrieve it. Inside I saw a cloud of gas that spoke to me, but I cannot remember what it said. Story 40. When I was a kid, I walked with my mom from our campsite to the bathroom. We saw a skunk-like creature cross the dirt road. I watched it walk to the edge of the woods, and then the woods folded over like a page being flipped and the skunk disappeared. It reminded me of the movie Inception, although that film came out years later. I went back to the spot a few times but never saw it again. Story 41. My best friend in middle school had just moved into the neighborhood. His house had previously belonged to an old woman who had died there. One night, I was sleeping over and woke in the middle of the night to get a glass of water. As I walked out of his bedroom, I entered a long hallway that led to the living, dining, and kitchen area. All of the lights in the house were off except the kitchen light. From my viewpoint, I could not see the kitchen directly, but framed pictures lined the hallway walls. And the glass panes were illuminated by the kitchen light, allowing me to see the kitchen in the reflection. In one of the panes, I saw a woman in a robe standing by the stove. She had her back to me and I could not see her face, but steam billowed from her as if she were boiling a pot of tea. My friend's mother drank a lot of tea, so I thought it was her, but when I rounded the corner into the kitchen, there was nobody there. I am about 99% certain I saw a ghost. I have no other explanation. Story 42. I saw an alien spacecraft shoot across the sky when I was 13. It was followed by what I assumed were American fighter jets. Then there was the explosion. A few months later, a new county park opened, Bayshore County Park. Story 43. In the summer of 2009, my dad took me on vacation to Estes Park, Colorado. I was a big fan of The Shining and interested in paranormal studies. We stayed there for about 3 days. On the second day, my father walked into our room with a strange look. When I asked him what was wrong, he said he had just seen a ghost. He had been leaving the basement gym and saw a pair of translucent legs walk through an office door. My father never lies. The look on his face said everything. We had signed up for the hotel's daily ghost tour. While exploring the basement, my dad's recently fully charged camera lost power. He asked the tour guide about it, and the guide said that happens often in the basement. Later that night, we were watching the television show Ghost Hunters in our second-floor room. My father decided to do an impromptu investigation. We turned the lights off and asked if there were any spirits and if they could knock on something. A few seconds later, we heard a knock on the wall. My father then asked if any spirits could reveal themselves. A misty figure appeared in the corner of the room. It took the shape of a person and remained in the corner. I was astonished. I had had a few strange experiences before, like thinking I heard my name whispered in an empty house, but nothing on this level. I ran out of the room and called my mom to explain what had happened. She tried to calm me. My perception of the world had been turned on its head. I had believed in ghosts but never had a major personal experience. That night, I took a dose of NyQuil to help me sleep. Years later, my mom and grandmother toured the Stanley Hotel. My grandmother took a photo near the staircase where a portrait of the founder hangs. She did not notice at the time, but later discovered a bearded apparition in the photo. It is the best ghost photo I have ever seen. Story 44. Honestly, just the current state of the world and many other human-on-human events throughout history. The Holocaust, slavery, torture devices, etc. People fucking suck. Story 45. One time I woke up in the middle of the night and saw what looked like a massive spider-like thing on the wall. I could only see legs. It scurried under my bed, and I could not find it when I looked underneath. I lay down and felt compelled to say, "If there is anyone here, please make your presence known." Afterward, I could not move any part of my body for about 20 seconds. I went back to sleep. Story 46. When I was 13, I woke up at 3 o'clock and went downstairs to watch television. In the living room, a blue light was coming from the set. It had refractive effects, as if it were coming from beneath a liquid. I was too scared to look directly to see what it was emitting, and the only electronic device in the room was a cathode ray television. Story 47. I am not a stupid guy. I own a very large business, used to cook at a professional level, and worked as an assistant in the operating room. I lead a relaxed lifestyle and do not believe in extraterrestrials or unidentified flying objects visiting Earth. A long time ago, as I was leaving a friend's house, I saw something I cannot explain. A triangle of lights moving at an incredible speed in the sky at low altitude, and it made absolutely no sound. The only logical explanation would be a drone, but this was 15 years ago, and a drone would certainly have made a sound at that speed. Story 48. 15 dreams later came true in real life. Donald Trump's re-election, animal trafficking, the 2025 conflict in Pakistan, my cat becoming very sick and dying, and bee stings. Story 49. Americans are allowing their civil rights to be eroded before their very eyes. Story 50. I lived in a house where, when I was alone, faucets turned on by themselves and pictures fell off the walls for no reason. Story 51. 15 years ago, in an apartment my wife and I rented, someone was knocking on our hallway closet door from the inside and turning the doorknob back and forth. I opened the door and found no one inside. Another night, a dark figure stood at the end of our bed. My wife saw both incidents, so I know I am not imagining them. We moved out of that apartment and have not experienced anything unusual since. Story 52. To be honest, the news lately is the scariest thing I have seen since reading about World War II in high school. Story 53. I was in my room on my computer playing Star Wars Galaxies. I was in the middle of a fight when I heard someone turning my bedroom doorknob, rattling it, and trying to open my locked door. Assuming it was my mother or my brother, I told them to hold on, that I would be right there, and asked what they wanted. The door stopped rattling and I could see a shadow under the door move down the hallway toward their rooms. My fight was over in less than a minute. I got up to check, and there was no one there. I went down the hall and was the only one in the house. My mom worked nights and my brother was a teenager with a license. There was no exit in the direction the shadow went. When I ran outside to look around, there was no one to be seen unless they had sprinted across the driveway into the woods or jumped down the embankment behind the house. That was the craziest part. I could not explain it. Story 54. I thought it was ball lightning until a few years ago when I learned what it actually was. About 20 years ago, my friends and I saw one deep in the woods. It scared the life out of us. Story 55. Back in high school, when I was depressed, I watched myself in the third person as I took my own life. Story 56. I was half asleep when I suddenly sat up in bed and saw what looked like a huge figure to my right. It frightened me so much that I had to take deep breaths to avoid an instant anxiety attack. Story 57. When I was a kid, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw the Hat Man. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.